Good morning, evening, or afternoon, whatever time of the day it might be when you're watching this video. My name is Yupari, and I'd like to welcome you into this bonus video. So what we're doing is we're going to be taking the painting that we quote-unquote finished in the last, I guess, series of episodes, whatever we want to call it. So I'm just going to go ahead and continue developing it. At the end of that video, I actually asked you all if you wanted me to continue pushing the hair, the color here, putting color here, and for the background and all of that. So that's what we're gonna do today. And I'm going to oil out the painting first. So I'm gonna be using my medium here, which I just have on the cap, and that medium is Neil McGilp. So I'm just gonna be applying a little bit of oil to the dry painting. So I've finished, or quote-unquote finished, this painting, I think, I don't even know, I think on Friday or something of last week, and today it is Wednesday. And this is the same palette that I had from Friday, so almost a week later, I still have my paints. I had to replace the burnt umber, and I added a little more sap green, but these are basically the same oil paints. And if you're wondering how in the world they're still wet, so what I did was I put the palette in a freezer, and that's actually what I do at home with my studio work and all of that. I actually just preserve my paints by putting them in a freezer. I might even have some paints from a month ago or so, and they're still usable. And it all depends on the color, really. A lot of your reds and your Alizarins and all that, they stay wet pretty long. The burnt umber, not so much. So again, if you want to know exactly what materials I'll be using for this video, you can always go ahead and scroll down to the description box below, and I'll have all that information typed up for you. So for those of you that might not have watched the previous videos in the development of this painting, I'm going to go ahead and link the last video where I went in and developed the forms. So I'm going to be using the same color palette. So let's go ahead and mix up our value scale of flesh tone once again, just like we did last week. So titanium white, yellow ochre will be our start for the brightest light, and of course all of these colors are going to be tweaked. So I think today I read in some of the comments that you wanted me to put some more highlight onto the nose, maybe add a little more subtlety to the flesh tones of the face, although most of you said to leave the face as it is and just kind of develop the hair in this area. So we might put a few touches here. So we might put a few little touches there, such as pushing these highlights, but not that much. I'm going to be showing you how to push the hair a little bit further with this painting, and some of these shapes, and kind of how I deal with backgrounds. So the color palette that I'm using today, so from left, so top left down here is titanium white, flake white, burnt umber, alizarin permanent, cadmium red medium, yellow ochre, sap green, ultramarine blue, and ivory black. And my basic flesh tone mixtures are kind of just a combination of the cadmium red, yellow ochre, titanium white, and burnt umber. Believe it or not, those colors are pretty much the most essential, I think, to the flesh tones that I'm using in here. So I'm just making a generic value scale of flesh tone, but I do kind of remember some of the mixtures, such as in the middle tones here I have burnt umber and alizarin permanent, and then as we get darker and darker we're going to use a little more burnt umber, sap green, and then we're going to be kind of in the alizarin value scale, or sorry, alizarin color scale as we get further down. And now we're approaching the darkest dark, so we're using ivory black, burnt umber, ultramarine blue. All right, so for this painting, I think that the important thing to address as of right now is going to be the dark of the hair. But before that, one of you suggested to push the highlight on the nose, so I'm going to do that. So rather than just to work with this yellow, I'm actually going to tint it. Ooh, I got to be careful. Which color am I going to use? Tiny bit of ultramarine blue and titanium white, just so that this highlight isn't so yellow. So we've cooled it down a little bit with the ultramarine blue, and I feel like this color is going to jump. So it's going to be very bright, very much like the highlight that you're seeing on the photo reference. And there it is. It's extremely bright, so I'm going to take some of that out. Again, I wouldn't recommend doing that if you're using flake white. Alright, so the nose right over here, let's just push that light a little bit and see how we had more room to move lighter. Alright, so now let's see. So the dark of the hair, I'm going to use alizarin permanent, ultramarine blue, ivory black. So let's see here. See that dark? I still need to get it darker. I'm going to switch brushes here. Switching brushes. So I'm going to use a size 4 filbert brush, and I'm going to mix in a different area. So let's mix over here. Ultramarine blue. I definitely need to get these darks. There we go. Now with the hair, you want to treat it just like any other form. So for instance, if you think about just any form in general, think about a basketball. It has a light shape, it has light, shade, halftones. Look at the portrait. We have light, shadow, a bunch of halftones, some color variations, a little bit of anatomy in there. So with the hair, it's not so much about the anatomy, but it's a little more about the interplay of light and dark. So the photo reference does kind of provide a problem because it's so dark. I can try to edit it with my editor. What editor do I even use? I think it's called Photoscape or something. I don't have anything fancy like Photoshop or whatever, but rather than try to rely on technology to adjust this, I'm going to rely on my understanding of form. So now the light is coming from this direction, so let's go ahead and use the other brush now. Take a little bit of flesh tone and do something kind of risky here. So we're going to put a little bit of light. So the reason I'm using a little bit of flesh tone instead of what you would think that I would use, such as like a blue or something, is that the light on the hair is a little bit deceptive. So it's not so cold, but it's not so hot either. So it's a very, very strange color, but what's more important, of course, is the value. So right next to that light, there's going to be a dark shape. So thinking about form with the hair, I'm thinking that this area here is going to be facing away from the light. This whole area is going to be pretty dark. So, but the only difference is that this, as it turns away from the light, is going to be the absolute darkest area. But it should be very close in value to this region of the hair. So a little more ultramarine blue, and if you're wondering why I'm using ultramarine blue, It's because the underpainting and the layers that have been built onto the underpainting are fairly warm. So now I'm using a hue shift to help push the difference between this patch of color and say this patch of color. And ultramarine blue is just darker anyway. So you could think of it that way. Darker over here. And I'd hate to say this, but at the end of the day, if the only thing I got right was the hair, then that probably wasn't a good day. So I obviously put much more attention into the portrait, into the proportions and all that when I'm painting. But I don't want to neglect the hair too much. And of course, this is, I'd like to think of this as more of a bonus video for all of you. That's why I asked you at the end of the last video featuring this painting whether or not you wanted me to continue it. So this is mostly for those of you that wanted to see, actually this is entirely for those of you that wanted to see how I developed this further. So now in the middle tone region of the palette, a little bit of ultramarine blue. So there we go. A little bit of a light shape. Now from my angle, this is glaring quite a bit, and that's okay. Oil paint tends to do that. So now we have a little bit of light there, but that shape is very ambiguous. So again, just a few little brush marks just to kind of get a little flavor for the shape of the hair, the shape of the light on the hair. So rather than thinking of individual strands of hair, let's think about large masses of hair. And I still want the underpainting to show through because I just think that looks cool. No other reason. And the old masters did it, so if the old masters let their underpainting show through, then I think it's okay for me to do that. What do you think? So there is quite a bit of blue now in the hair. So we now have a little more of a value change. So let's see. Over here, this shape is going to be a little bit lighter because it's receiving light. So basically the same color that I had up there, I'm going to put over here. Now remember, this patch here is going to be a little bit darker. It's probably not perceptible to my camera, but again, rather than just copy the values that I'm seeing in the photograph, I'm interpreting using my knowledge of form. And yes, the ultramarine blue and the alizarin permanent is going to be making a purple, so that's why I'm using the ivory black to kind of neutralize the saturation of that purple. Although purple hair is pretty neat. It'd be nice if I could find a model with purple hair. Okay, so now the next thing to address is going to be the rest of the background color. So some of you wanted me to just continue this shape onto the back. Some of you wanted me to, I don't know, I read something about just putting in the rest of the background. I still don't know, but I think what I'm going to do is go ahead and put that red and then this dark red back there for the chair that the model is sitting on. And if I don't like it, I'll take it out. So if you want to see a painting develop that has a little more of a little more attention paid to the composition as opposed to just the study, today Actually, just like I think an hour ago, I uploaded another video. Remember, I'm uploading every day now. So I uploaded the start of another painting, a larger painting that's going to be more than just head and shoulders. So be on the lookout for that. By the time this video is uploaded, that video should have already been uploaded at least a day ago. So be on the lookout for that. So a little bit of sap green. So I'm not trying to color match what I'm looking at in the photo reference. Rather, I'm just thinking of the value that I want in the background. And another question, whoops, oh well. So another question that I read was, how do I consider the background color for a portrait? So basically, if the colors are a little bit warmer, then I like to push the background colors a little bit cooler, vice versa. But not always the case. With this painting in particular, I was actually just trying to go for, at least when I painted that shape here, I was trying to go for the actual value that I was observing in the hue. I was just trying to push it a little bit cooler. So the background, really just try to think about how the background contrasts the flesh tone. And the same goes with the value. If you follow me on Instagram, you'll see how I change certain values in the background based on the values of the flesh tone. So let's suppose the shoulder goes about there. I don't want the shoulder to match up with the corner of the square, so I'm going to push that over. So I'm going to go ahead and fill in the rest of this shape, probably up to, let's say, I don't know, about here. So I'm going to fill in the rest of that. So now we put in the rest of this shape, and you might notice I raised the light sensitivity on my camera just because I think that it was appearing too dark, but I'm going to go ahead and hopefully the light sensitivity on the camera doesn't overexpose too much. I'm just going to go ahead and push this shape a little bit darker. And the long-awaited thing that I've been holding back for a while, I think it kind of needs it now. Yeah, this shape. So for the hair on the other side, on the right side, one of you mentioned you wanted to see the hair on the right side, and we're going to put it in. And this is the glory, really, of working with layers, is that if I don't like it, if I don't like the hair on this side, I can always take it out because I have a layer underneath. So I'm actually going to be using a smaller brush because I have to be careful not to lose the outside shape. So very carefully trying to make sure that I adhere to the shapes previously established and the edge quality. So let's see, I'm going to need a little support for my hand. This comes out about here. So in order to make these edges soft again, I'm going to have to use some of the flesh tone. So I'm going to take some of this, using a little bit of flesh tone in between. With a single brush stroke, I'm going right over that outline to try and soften the edge. I'm going to go back in with another flesh tone. It's really all about this edge. This is going to be a very, very descriptive edge now. See how it goes out, in, and then into the neck. So the photograph makes the edge pretty much the same degree of sharpness all throughout. But actually I'm going to let this area be the sharpest in this little segment. So this area will be the sharpest, and then that will get softer. So even though you don't see it in the photograph, we're going to soften this because we are not cameras. We are human beings, and I don't think that we would be looking that intently at her neck. Instead, we'd be looking more into this region here, don't you think? This is actually turning out to be a lot more informative, I think, with edge quality than I originally intended, which I hope is not a bad thing. So let's go ahead and try to eliminate some glare very carefully now. Okay, so now I'm just going to fill in the rest of this shape. So it goes out to about there. Now remember, the background is wet again, so I'm letting the paint of the hair intermix with the paint on the background. And then with the same brush, the background brush, I'm going to go in and just soften this edge. And then we're going to push this further, a little more dark. Really want this value to be dark. So it's a little more dark. We're going to push this down, meeting with that edge. So now we're going to put in the flesh tones in this area here. So with a different brush, this is a size 6 filbert, so let's just take some of these flesh tones, cool them down. A little bit of ultramarine blue, flake white, and for those of you that don't know why I use flake white is a white that allows me to use more of it without raising the value too much, thus allowing me to create more body to the paint where I want it. So I'm going to want that here. So I'm trying to go for the exact color and value right away in a very alla prima fashion. So this area here is going to contrast. So this area of flesh tone is going to serve as a contrast to this one. And in theory, hopefully it does. So let's go ahead and think about the top plane of the shoulder now. So I'm going to go ahead and with a different brush, have a darker middle tone region that's cooler, and this is going to serve as the soft area of the shadow. So if you notice, the shadow kind of gets a little softer down here. So that's basically what we're doing, just trying to get this soft spot. Then it's a little bit lighter over here. Keeping the edges rather soft over here is going to be kind of a nice thing. So what we have is the clavicle somewhere over here, so the shoulder. This should probably come out even further. Oh man. So probably will come out to about there. Yeah, I think about there. I don't really have that information in the photo reference, so sorry. I cropped it out by mistake and didn't save the original. So, yep, I failed in that regard. But what I am going to do is just focus on that orange, and then we're going to let this kind of fade a little bit. So like I say sometimes, when in doubt, blur it out. So that's what we're going to do with that. So the clavicle forms a plane change over here. So as we move down, it's actually going to get a little darker and a little pinker, but barely noticeable. That's even pushing it a bit too much. And if anything, we want to keep this rather simplistic, but we can't forget about a little bit of the anatomy for the neck. So that would be a little shape for the suprasternal notch. The suprasternal notch is there. So it's the area right in between the two clavicles. Now, I'm not an anatomist, so if I say anything wrong in terms of the anatomy, I'm sorry. A little bit of sap green. So I'm trying to get a intermediate value to soften this edge now. So that's pretty good. Now I'm realizing that this video might end up becoming longer than I wanted it to, so I may or may not cut out certain scenes and just explain them to you. I'm not entirely sure yet. So for instance, I may cut out this portion of painting the neck and then show you the final result. But then again, if you're listening to me say this, then you know I didn't cut it out. So this, I think, is referred to as a penumbra, or the area where the shadow the edge of the shadow gets a little bit softer. But in any case, the edge of the shadow is getting a little bit softer. All right, so I need my little support. So just softening the edge of that shadow. See how softening that edge just makes the shadow look a little more realistic? So it's a little pinker. So down here it's a little pinker, so let's take some of this, mix directly on the painting. Very alla prima style. And over there it's going to get darker, grayer, as this area of flesh tone is in shadow, but not quite as dark as that. So now the hint of orange that those of you that suggested in the comment section earlier wanted to see. So I'm mixing up just the cadmium red and the yellow ochre using the same brush that I basically painted the background with, without cleaning that brush, and the reason was just to help neutralize the saturation of this orange. So, like you suggested in the comments, just a hint of the orange. Is it the right orange? Probably not. I think it might need a little bit of alizarin. Bring that saturation down with some of the colors on the palette. I think that's a little better. Not sure. So with a different brush, let's get this little dark shape in here. So we're letting this be kind of loose, like an alla prima, to contrast this area here. So let's think about now the shape. So let's let this come down to here. And remember, alla prima just means basically painting wet on wet. It's one of the fastest and most difficult ways, in my opinion, to paint. It's extremely fast, but as a consequence, it's an extremely difficult technique, in my opinion, painting wet on wet. So I think that this shape is a little wrong. I think this needs to come out. This is why I usually say to stand back. So I'm just sitting back right now. This might come in even more. let's say to about there. When in doubt, blur it out. So let's make this very soft. Now we're going to put this color over here. So the continuation of the shoulder, and yet this is going to give us even another problem because I'm also missing that side of the shoulder. But that's okay. So I'm just kind of extending that curve just to see how far out that goes. Back to the ultramarine blue, and tell you what, there's a little strand of hair here. Let's paint that in there. A little more alizarin and ivory black, and her hair is pretty long, so it's actually going to go even further down. So let's put this down. So let's see, with the edge of the shirt, I think that's all right. So I'm going to go ahead and start to put in some stuff over here. So let's take a little bit of alizarin, some burnt umber, a little bit of neo-McGilp medium just to make the paint flow a little bit. So this area is going to be dark, like a dark red. And this is how you do it really with backgrounds. You just jump in there. That's why with the next video series that you're going to see that I started yesterday, and the video I uploaded today, that one is going to have a lot more consideration for composition. But if you find yourself in this position where you don't really know exactly where you're going to go with the background, and trust me, I've been there. I'm almost always in that situation, to be honest. I found that the best thing to do is just put something in there in the background, and if you don't like it, take it out. So a little more dark over here. So the background is going to be kind of abstract. There are these compositional elements. So one thing I don't want is this line matching up with this line, matching up with the outside shape of the hair. Just compositionally, it just, I don't know. I don't like when things match up perfectly. So let's just go ahead and move this shape back, keeping it very painterly. So I'm just going to go ahead and fill in the rest of this. Now that we have this area of the painting established, I think the next thing I'm going to do is take a look again at the cast shadow. Now that I have this color here, I see that I could probably extend that cast shadow. It's not too big of a problem, but I think that I just want to try out moving that shape. So a little bit of sap green, ultramarine blue, burnt umber. Let's see if we can get this shadow color back. Ivory black. So I will say my experience with alla prima painting actually really does help, because all of the background, I mean all of the additions that you're seeing today are alla prima, meaning being painted wet on wet. And I usually describe it as the fast and furious kind of way of painting. Yes, you can create an image very quickly, but it does have a lot of drawbacks. So it's harder to control paint, in my opinion, when you're working wet on wet. It's harder to control the drawing, really. But I mean, if we get the hair a little bit wrong, it's not the end of the world, nor the background. So a little bit of ultramarine blue, and I think at the same time, I still feel like I can keep pushing that darker, but for now, let's just go ahead and move this shape down. And again, I'm going to have to remix this intermediate value. That helps to soften the cast shadow. It also helps to create the illusion that it is a cast shadow. So let's get a clean and soft brush to further soften this edge here. So now I think the next thing I'll do is take a look at the hairline. I think I can paint the hairline a little more convincingly now than I had before. So I'm going to go ahead and mix up my flesh tone. So pretty much just red, yellow, white, neutralizing it with the colors that I have on the palette, but I'm going to cool it down a little bit with the ultramarine blue. So with the hairline, like I said, I liked leaving the underpainting to show, but I think that there's a little too much warmth in there. So this color should be about good. So let's go ahead and take a look now at this shape for the hairline. So I'm just using this value that we mixed up as an intermediate, kind of a transition from the forehead, the structure of the forehead and the hairline itself. And the color is a little bit cooler. I perceive that color to be a little bit cooler than the underpainting that we left. Notice these warmer tones are remnants of the underpainting. So over here now, very slight touch. So I'm going to get a clean, dry synthetic brush just to help soften this edge here. And to contrast, we're going to put in this sharp edge. So we're going to be going back and forth between sharp edge and soft edge. So this will be sharp, this will be soft. Very slight touch. I think it needs to be a little darker. Now with the fan brush, just going to eliminate some glare. I'm going to return with the clean, dry brush. Until the hair seems to be sitting on the structure of the forehead. The next thing I think we're going to do is fix this eyebrow. I kind of somehow slashed it off this side. So I'm going to go ahead and put it back. So I'm using the same color that I used for the hair, really. no more complicated than burnt umber, ultramarine blue, a little bit of alizarin permanent. The only difference now is that the paint application is extremely thin. So let's picture the eyebrow wrapping all the way around. So there's tiny little cosmetic things. Now taking from this lighter region of the palette, remember this was just titanium white yellow ochre, and I'm going to add a little bit of, I added a little bit of cadmium red medium. Let's add a little bit of alizarin permanent, and I'm going to see if I can key up the light on the forehead a little bit. So I did have a little highlight here before, but it seems like the front of the skull, the frontal region of the skull here, is catching a little bit more light than I had originally described. Now that's not straight white. As you notice on the palette, you can compare this white to that white. So that's kind of showing how much lighter we can go without being in too much trouble with the value range. And again, I was trying to make the second color pass be the final color pass, but again, you're seeing the entire process unfold as it really happens. So again, I didn't really notice that I had this much further that I could go with the value range. Now the only problem might be the exposure on my camera. So I'm not sure if the camera is exposing or overexposing too much on this light. I guess I'll see when I review the footage, right? So I'm just following this path all the way across the side of the frontal region of the skull. So a little bit lighter on the side there. Now again, it's not straight white. So I'm kind of scattering the color a little bit. I'm not trying to paint completely over what I had before. Instead, I'm building onto it. So a little bit more light into this area here. Woof, that's too much light. So it is fairly light, but it shouldn't be catching as much light as this area here. So this is how we're pushing even more dimension into this painting. I'm just going to scatter the color just so it looks like it's blended into the original surface. That is that looks like it fits into the previous layer. So remember, the photograph tends to flatten out form quite a bit, so we pushed the volume from this corner and this corner, meaning this corner here got darker. Remember, I mentioned earlier that I pushed this area darker because I know that the photograph's tendency is to flatten it, as opposed to in nature there would be a very noticeable value change here. Not super extreme, but still noticeable. And the same thing is going to be applied here, except the value transition here should be a little more noticeable because this shape here is turning away from the light a little bit more rapidly. Now a little bit darker. Gonna just subtract some of that paint off. So again, don't do this if you're using Flake white. So yep, you're getting the reality of how I do this. So I'm just using my finger kind of to disperse some of the, like scatter some of the light of the paint. Okay, so now I think it's almost complete. I guess the next thing I want to look at probably will be this area. So now that I've pushed the light a little bit there, I'm noticing that this plane could have a little bit more light, and a little bit is the key word. So in the same kind of region of value, I just added a little bit of alizarin permanent. So let's go ahead and very, very carefully. So just a little tiny bit of light here. Very tiny. Almost imperceptibly tiny. And again, I'm scattering the paint a little bit, just so that it looks like it fits into the previous layer of color. And I think maybe the chin as well, so I'm going to get a little bit of flesh tone from the palette. Just add a few little touches here just to soften this little transition. And so I think those will be just about the final changes that I'll make on this portrait painting. Again, thank you all so much for your suggestions in the comment section for the previous video of the development of this particular painting. So thanks again for watching. I wish you the best in all of your artwork. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will see you tomorrow.